Welcome to the Ajax Public Library's Top 10 Tips for Tenants presentation, presented in partnership with the Durham Community Legal Clinic. My name is Julia Campbell, and I am the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Library. I just wanted to start by quickly covering a couple of things on Zoom, just in case there's anyone who is new to using it. So today's presentation is being recorded, as I mentioned, so if you do not wish to be seen, you can feel free to turn your video off by clicking the camera icon on the bottom left of your screen. The microphone icon to mute and unmute yourself can also be found at the bottom left. And during the presentation portion, I would ask that you please keep yourself muted just to minimize any distractions. In the top right of your screen, you can choose your view. So the speaker view will allow you to see the speaker on the side of your screen, and then the gallery view allows you to see all the participants. So I leave it up to you to decide which view you prefer. You will also notice a chat button along the bottom. So if you have any questions or comments along the way, I encourage you to use the chat. You have the option of chatting with the entire group, or you can send a private message to myself, Julia, or to any of the presenters. And we also have Austin with us, who is a student at the legal clinic. So he will be monitoring and collecting the questions, and then our presenters will be answering them in the last 15 minutes of the program. And as I mentioned, the Q&A portion will not be recorded, just to protect everyone's privacy. If you choose not to see the chat screen along the bottom, you can just click the chat again, and it will be removed from the side of your screen. So I think that covers the basics for Zoom, but if any other questions come up, please don't hesitate to use the chat. So now I would like to introduce our presenters for this afternoon. Ashley Somerville is a licensed paralegal with the Law Society of Ontario. She's passionate about community development work and committed to working within the legal system to improve and advocate for poverty law issues. Ashley has been a member of the Durham Community Legal Clinic Housing Group for 2 years and represents low-income tenants before the Landlord and Tenant Board Tribunal in Durham Region. We also have Danielle Scheffel with us, and Danielle is also a licensed paralegal with the Law Society of Ontario. She's been with the Durham Community Legal Clinic as a tenant representative for the past 5 years. She's passionate about everyone having access to justice, and she advocates for low-income clients at the Landlord and Tenant Board Tribunal, ensuring their voices are heard. And last but not least, we have Deborah Noak-Alves. Deborah has been a licensed paralegal with the Law Society of Ontario since 2014. Since starting at the Durham Community Legal Clinic in 2015, she's been an advocate for clients in several different areas of law, including criminal injuries compensation for victims of violence and their families. As a recent addition to the housing group, she brings the same passion and determination to provide the best possible outcome for her clients by facilitating access to justice through legal advice and representation. We feel very lucky to have them with us this afternoon, so without further ado, I will turn it over to them to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Julia. I hope everybody can hear me okay. If there's any feedback from me, please let me know. I do have a fireplace going in the background as I'm freezing. So we'll try and, if you hear anything, please let me know. Again, my name is Danielle, and I am a tenant rep with Durham Community Legal Clinic. Julia, thank you so much for putting this together with us. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to know their legal rights. And so we put together a little bit of a presentation today. Bear with me, I don't do share screen, so I'm new to this. We have tested it and it did work, so let's hope it works now. I'm just going to put this up there. Again, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, and Austin will be monitoring them. If you can't, if we unmute you and you can't speak and you just want Austin to read out your question, he can do that for you as well. So today we're just going to talk briefly about what your top 10 tenant tips are. These are like our common myths that we hear all the time. People will come in and say, well, I heard this. So we decided to kind of give it as a presentation to show that yes, your friend who may know a lot could possibly be giving you the wrong answers, and unfortunately you could get evicted or anything like that, right? So we want to make sure that you're prepared for that. So let me see if this can work. For some reason it's not letting me switch, so we'll do it this way. Okay. I'll share. Bear with me, for some reason it's not working. There we go. Okay, so tenant associations, this is a common one we hear a lot. Tenant associations is a group of tenants who get together and want to have, want to represent the whole building or for everyone. It's only based on the common areas. It is not based on your own rental unit. But many landlords say, no, you can't have your meetings here. You can't, you know, we're not providing a space. Well, if there's a space there, such as a common room or whatnot, then landlords can give you that opportunity to use that room to hold your monthly meetings to hold a tenant association. And doing that, what it does is it puts all of you together to show that you have one common ground. So if the maintenance isn't being done in the hallways, or, you know, the units at the front, the mailboxes and everything else aren't working, and you've tried and nothing's going, you can join together and have that opportunity to file an application together. You are allowed to hang up information in regards to when your meeting will be, the location. The one thing we do say is if the landlord says, no, you can't have it in the lobby, the reasoning why is the fire marshal will come in and say, no, you're only allowed, you know, so many people in the lobby. So that's why they don't like to do it like that. But the landlord cannot tell you you can't have that opportunity to do that, okay? The next one is the landlord's obligations. So landlords are obligated to provide tenants with rent receipts. So now's the perfect time to talk about that, because we're now in January, and you know we're now into the new year, so tax receipts start coming out. A landlord must provide those. If the landlord doesn't provide those, you can actually call us and we'll help you with the rental housing enforcement unit to get those documents given to you. But you are entitled to your rent receipts. Now there's two ways they can do it. They can give it to you each time you pay your rent, or they just give you one block letter at the end of the year saying you paid for a total amount of months. So yes, that is mandatory. They are supposed to be giving you those. If a tenant signs a lease and asks the landlord for a copy and the landlord refuses the tenant is allowed to withhold rent until it is paid, or until they receive that, provided with 21 days of signing. So on the 22nd day, if you ask for it, you still have to pay rent. All rental arrears must be paid at the time that the lease is given to you, okay? So you can't just say, oh, well, I didn't get it, so I'm not paying it. No, the minute you get that signed lease, it has to be paid, okay? If it's not a written lease, and this is something we're noticing a lot more of, is a lot of landlords aren't doing written leases. So they should be, because it outlines everything within your rights of the tenancy. Some landlords won't. So if you're renting a room and you're covered under the RTA, they'll just give you a piece of paper with their email on it. They have to give you a piece of paper, and in that piece of paper, it has to have their full name, their service address, and a phone number, because if anything happens, you need to be able to get a hold of them. Okay, if the landlord does not provide this information, then the tenant can withhold rent until it is provided. Once it is provided, you have to pay your rent. So if it's 6 months later, you still have to pay for the 6 months that you didn't pay your rent. Okay. Ashley, do you want me to? Okay.
So winter eviction, we get this a lot. There seems to be a pretty prevalent myth around that landlords cannot evict you during the winter months. This is not true. The landlords can evict you during the winter months. So basically, the sheriff in Durham region will evict any time of year. The only time that they don't evict is between Christmas and New Year's, and that's just because the sheriff in Durham region is kind. They could evict if they chose to, but they take those holidays off. So the only way for an eviction to happen, though, is through the sheriff. So the sheriff can come and change your locks. It doesn't matter if there's a snowstorm, you have a newborn baby, it's January 31st and it's freezing. It doesn't matter. If the landlord and tenant board issue an eviction order and the landlord has filed it with the sheriff can come and enforce evictions any time of year. So stay tuned for more on the current eviction moratorium, because things are a little bit different now, but in general, landlords can evict you during winter. Okay. So pets and visitors. I'll let Danielle do the pet part because she loves that. But I'm just going to say in general, you are responsible for any damages that your guests may cause in the unit, but the landlord is not allowed to charge you more rent for having a guest stay with you. And I'll let Danielle take it away.
It's funny, you give me the pet part as my dog is ripping my arm off. Yes, the pet part. The reason why I say the pet part is because landlords always say, no, you can't have Rocky with you, and Rocky's like a 60-pound dog or whatever. You can't have Rocky with you or Fluffy the cat. If you do, I'm gonna charge you $50 extra because you're bringing in a pet. You do not have to pay $50 for Rocky or Fluffy. Okay, you are allowed to have a pet. It's not an enforceable clause. Unless Rocky or Fluffy decide to destroy the house or the rental unit, then yes, your landlord can say, okay, we have a problem here. You need, but they have to go to court and they have to have a hearing to say why you need to get rid of Rocky and Fluffy. The other reason why they may say you have to get rid of Rocky and Fluffy is if, say, you're in a basement apartment and the upstairs tenants or the landlord has a medical reason, such as allergies. I'm allergic to Fluffy, so I can't have Fluffy if, Fluffy can't be here because I'm deathly allergic to Fluffy and fur's coming up through the vent, then the landlord can file an application saying that, we need to get rid of Fluffy because, the person upstairs is allergic. That's the only time a landlord can do those, okay? I forgot we're not taking questions yet. Interest. Landlords must pay interest on the last month's rent to the tenants. So currently right now for 2021, there is no rent increase. It is frozen. So if someone gets a letter from the landlord this week that says, oh, well, I'm increasing your rent as of February 1st, they do not have to pay the rent increase because there is a government freeze on that. Which means there's also not an interest being paid to the last month's rent. Usually what happens is with the last month's rent is for the interest, instead of writing a check for the $15, what they'll do is they'll just post it to the last month's rent. And then that way, when you move out, both of those amounts are the same. Some landlords will actually issue a check, and it's usually done on the anniversary date of when you moved in. However, some landlords will change it to, if you moved in May, they kind of like the fiscal year to be January to December, so they won't do anything until that year, but they can't do that until 1 year that you've lived in that unit. Okay. All right, Ashley. Maybe.
Yeah, so following up on what Danielle said, the landlord may raise the rent on the anniversary date of your move-in. So 12 months after you move in, they can raise the rent. However, like Danielle said, for 2021, rent increases are frozen because of COVID-19. So the notice of increase must be given in writing 90 days before the increase date. So you have 90 days of notice on a board approved form. So the landlord will serve you with 90 days notice. Every year, the government releases the amount of interest. So last year was 2%. This year, like I said, it's frozen, so there's no amount, but next year there'll likely be an amount that the landlord can raise the rent by. We don't know what that amount is yet. If there is an illegal rent increase, if you do not challenge it within a year, it becomes the legal rent. So you must challenge it within a year if you get an illegal rent increase. If the landlord wants to raise your rent above the guidelines, so that means more than the 2%, they would need to file with the landlord tenant board, presenting all of their legal reasons for doing so. So a lot of times it's to do with, they did a lot of work on the building. They replaced the elevators. They had to fix the parking structure, big expenses that they use in order to get a rent increase that's above the guideline. Units built and rented out for the first time after November 2018 are not protected under the rent increase rules. So this means that the landlord is allowed to raise the rent however much they wish. They want to raise your rent $250, they're allowed to do so. However, like we said, this year there is a rent increase freeze, so that is for 2021. So we basically just talked about that, but if you agree to have your rent increased for services or facilities, that's obviously still allowed. So the rent freeze is made to benefit those who are renting houses, basement units, community care, care homes, mobile park leases, rent geared to income, and other affordable housing units. This is the government's way of trying to assist during these pandemic times.
Thanks, Ashley. Damages and deposits. So a landlord, this one's always a good one for us because there's so many different deposits that landlords ask for. One of them is a key deposit, and it must be paid. It'll be returned when you get when you return your keys. The deposit ranges in the cost it is to replace the key. In my case, I am a renter and I have a fob in my unit. So my fob is $250 if I lose it, break it, or anything else like that. And so that is a deposit that I had to pay, and I will get it back when I give my keys back. But they can ask me for that because the actual cost to replace it and reprogram it is that expensive. But a regular key that you just get where it's one door key or a deadbolt key, you know, those cost under $10 to replace, unless it's a duplicated key or a non-duplicated key, then I believe they're a little bit more expensive. So landlords can ask for that sort of deposit. They can't ask for any other deposit, such as a cleaning deposit or a security deposit in case there's some sort of damage or what have you. They can't ask for anything more than a last month's rent deposit, which goes to the last month that you live in the unit. It can't go to, so if I don't pay rent for January and I'm in arrears, it can't go to January's rent. It has to go to the last month that you are living in the unit. And then if not, then they can take you to the board for that. But but the key deposit is the big one for us because that seems to be one of the big issues we have is everyone's like, no, they asked me for a key deposit. They are allowed. The security deposit and cleaning deposit, they are not. My apologies, it's so slow today. Okay, ending a tenancy. So a tenancy can end after the term by giving 60 days notice. So if the tenant's lease ends December 31st, they must give notice that they plan on leaving on October 31st. So on October 31st, I'd write a letter saying, "Dear landlord, I intend on leaving the unit on December the 31st. This gives the landlord and the tenant an agreement that we're ending the tenancy. And if so, then the landlord can file that note that I wrote, and it has to have the terms, you know, the dates, the unit, and what my intention is. So I plan on leaving within 60 days from this date. And the landlord can actually file that with the landlord and tenant board and get an order for you guys to agree that you're leaving. And then that way there's an order written, and the next day, so January 1st, they can go to the sheriff and have that enforced. If a tenant does not give notice and the lease becomes month to month, there's still 60 days notice that must be given. A lot of tenants believe that they only have to give 30 because there's 30 days in a month, 30 to 31. But it is 60 days notice, and it has to be in writing. Some adjudicators will take it as a text message. I believe in the good old handwritten, "Dear landlord, I'm leaving, 60 days. Here's today's date," and it has the 60 days on it. That way, if not, because if you don't, then the landlord can actually file against you and saying that you didn't give proper notice and you're responsible until they can get somebody to move back in.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Notice to enter. So in order to enter your unit, your landlord must give you 24-hour written notice unless it's an emergency. So an emergency would be flood, fire, anything sudden that needs immediate attention that there's no opportunity to wait 24 hours to get into your unit. The landlord can only enter between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., again, unless it's an emergency. And the notice must give a reasonable window of time. So a reasonable window would be between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. or between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., kind of like the cable guy. They give you a nice window. So it can't be, I'm just going to enter between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's not a reasonable window of notice. They must also explain why they're entering the unit. So to do an inspection, to fix maintenance issues, there has to be a reason listed on the notice as well. Once the landlord has given you 24 hours written notice explaining the reason why and giving you that fair window, you do have to allow entry, and you do not have to be home when this entry occurs. So even if you say, I'm working, you can't come in, the landlord is still allowed to enter your unit. Withholding rent. So you cannot withhold rent at all, ever. We say this because if there's maintenance issues or tenant right issues, you need to put it in writing to the landlord first to give them a reasonable window to respond. And if they don't respond, instead of withholding your rent, you're going to want to file an application with the Landlord and Tenant Board. It would be a T2 for tenant rights or a T6 for maintenance. And the reason we say don't withhold your rent is because any of the remedies that you are awarded on these tenant applications would automatically be taken off of any arrears that you have. So it's always better to go in with your applications, explain that you've let the landlord know in writing that all of these issues are happening. You have Niagara Falls coming in your living room. It's been crazy, and you're going to get awarded a rent abatement for that. But if you're withholding your rent, you won't actually ever see that abatement. It will just directly go towards the rent that you've withheld.
Okay, those are our slides. So I'm gonna figure out how to unshare this screen.
Yes, so while Danielle does that,
There we go.
touch on current eviction moratorium. So I'll also let Danielle chime in at the end. But currently, since the province of Ontario went back into a state of emergency and Doug Ford issued a stay-at-home order, there is an eviction moratorium in place. So what does this mean? This means that the sheriff is not enforcing eviction orders. This does not mean that the Landlord and Tenant Board has closed down or has stopped issuing orders. So back when the pandemic first started, the eviction moratorium did mean that there were no Landlord and Tenant Board hearings and no orders were being issued. However, in August, that moratorium lifted, and the Landlord and Tenant Board has been at full force since then, issuing orders. So this time around, that was not a practical solution, unfortunately. So this time around, the government has decided to say, you can still issue your eviction orders, but sheriff, you cannot enforce these eviction orders. So that means if you have a Landlord and Tenant Board hearing, you absolutely need to attend. It's crucial that you attend these hearings. Give us a call first, obviously. But attend your hearing. You can be evicted via eviction order. It just means that the sheriff cannot enforce. The only time a sheriff can enforce at this time is if it's an emergency matter. So if there's if the Landlord and Tenant Board orders an expedited eviction due to illegal acts or safety issues. Those are the only times that your eviction order will be enforced during this state of emergency period. And I'll let Danielle jump in there as well.
Oh, you covered everything there. Good job. Yeah, so I mean, Ashley covered everything on that way, so I think we're good. Is there any questions? Ow.
I